the intimate participation of speech processes in learning, in executing our plans, and it's expressive speech or verbalization that we use in problem solving in all of our intervention. So very often, normal classroom teaching doesn't emphasize the role of speech as a moderating influence in learning. The way speech controls our actions is a very simple, common sense idea, but the teacher somehow is not very sensitive about it.
Unfortunately.
So participation of speech processes was perhaps the best thing that we learned from Luria. Okay. Now, how can we define then the essence of our three kinds of remediation programs or intervention programs? We say that verbalizations are simply self-talk, thinking implicitly and explicitly. Perhaps is the first kind of pillar on which our programs rest. Now, what is verbalization or self-talk? It's something that we always use and encourage its use in solving problems. So in a way, you can say that self-talk develops conscious awareness of the problem and is based on what we nowadays call the elements of discovery learning. It prepares us to observe and discover. Now, it's used as a self-instruction. As you know, Vygotsky and Luria both believed that first the child is guided by external speech, the instructor, the teacher, the parents, the friends. These provide the external speech. Then the external speech is translated into internal speech. And as you and I know, when we think, we don't bother to think grammatically in long sentences. We have our own private speech.
Yes.
Piaget agreed with this as well. So that's why when we compare Vygotsky with Piaget, we said they had a lot of agreement. This internalization of speech then becomes our world, our tool for learning. As you know, Vygotsky thought that language is a tool, like a hammer is a tool. Language is a tool, an instrument, an extension of our hands and feet and head and eyes and ears. This is a tool. It's a cultural tool. And the language depends on the cultural history of the individual, where the child has grown up, how was the environment to start with, on and on. The child learns to do the task by using internal speech. Directions for doing a problem become internalized, often, and this is important, often under the guidance of an adult, like the teacher. So here comes the role of teacher. Many people believe, like Tomasello, that culture is not passed on by peer group. Culture survives because the adults pass it on to the younger generation. So if you are against the modern civilization, that the child learns from peers, according to many people who think that that is the end of your culture. Culture is never transmitted only by imitating the peer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the role of us as teachers, as parents, as guardians, even as neighbors in the community. Now, so internalization often works under the guidance of an adult. Now, children in a good remedial program, unlike in a classroom, are active learners. They learn actively. Their best kind of learning occurs through reflection. So nowadays, contemplative education has gained a foothold in new kind of teaching. Contemplative, reflective.
Mm-hmm.
And you get in all sorts of jargons like mindfulness and things like that these days, which is very popular. And you do meditation, you teach ADHD children how to sit down and calm themselves for 3 minutes before beginning the instruction in a classroom, on and on. So these are all devices to promote what we call contemplation. Now, children in good remedial program are reflective. They're engaged in thinking about what they're doing. Now, I was asked by one of you how the past theory of mind and how the remedial program affect the children. What's the most affected ability that can be observed in a child? This is a question that one of you raised in your letter. Now, let's remember that in past theory, the first letter is P. P means planning.
Mm-hmm.
Planning involves thinking. We can think if our plan is good, if it is bad. We think about thinking. And where does that take us to? To metacognition. Planning is a metacognitive process. We are forced to think about thinking. And it can be of two kinds. We learn a lot by asking people explicit questions. So we call it explicit metacognition. We seek out metacognitive hints or suggestions. But a lot of metacognition also occurs insidiously, without our active awareness. So we call that implicit metacognition. Now, isn't it wonderful to say that overt and covert internalized speech helps us in metacognition? Not only helps us in metacognition, as I've written in a book I have published called, you may not believe it, Consciousness Quest, where the East meets West. It's a whole book on consciousness where I draw from Eastern and Oriental philosophy and use it in neuropsychology. It's available. It's called Consciousness Quest, where the East meets the West. You might find Turkey in between the East and the West. Somewhere there.
Yeah, in the middle.
Between the Greco-European culture and the Oriental culture.
Yes.
You are in the middle.
All
You don't follow syllogistic reasoning all the time, nor do you always think in context, like most Japanese, Koreans, and to a certain extent, Indians do.
Mm-hmm.
We think in context. We don't think in pure logic. Now, how can we define then contemplative education, or what we do in contemplative education? I know we don't have all the time that we need, but this is used for operational skills. One of you asked, why should we go away from operational skills as the first step to learning? So she asked, Turkish teachers would like to hear about that from me. I'm not the unending source of knowledge. I know you have thought about these things. Now, good remediation program, in every module, we ask the child, now tell me, how did you do it? You would always do that, and that's interactive. How often does the teacher get a chance when she is teaching 50 children, or in Canada, 36 children at the same time, who have different biographies, who have different unique cases, they have unique life? How often we can encourage this? It's not possible. And yet, you may remember that the best teachers we had always made us think, always made us go beyond them. So in Indian villages, there is a proverb that the most foolish person is your primary school teacher.
Why is that?
You have surpassed him. He wants you to surpass. And that's the duty of a teacher, to have your disciple surpass you. That's the pleasure of the teacher. And it's also pleasure of the guru in India. When the disciple can surpass him or her. Now, what does it do? Then metacognition, or recognition of yourself as it is being formed continuously through interaction with others and through contemplation. We try everything for ourselves. Even the Buddha, the great Buddha said that do not accept anything without question.
Yeah, that's really important.
First principle, not to accept anything without questioning. And how many of us are passive learners in classroom, or believe that the child is a passive learner? So in our approach to remediation or intervention, we encourage the child to think for himself or herself. Verbalization is the basic criterion of good learning. That I verbalize. I become aware of how I'm doing. Now, sometimes you can hear the child engaged in self-talk, especially when doing a very difficult problem. You can see the child's lips moving, like that. You can even hear he or she is remarking to the other kid, this is what it is, kind of thing. So, what's the take-home message within the short time we had before I ask you to tell me what I need to say more. The take-home message that we say in idiomatic Canadian or American, what do I tell my mom when I go home? What did I learn? So we ask ourselves, what does the child take home that he or she has learned from our sessions on remediation? Something that the child tells her mother. Child says, Mom, I learned that I can be metacognitive. Mom says, what? What did you learn? He or she says, it's very simple. I can think for myself, not repeat what the teacher said or what's written in the book. So self-instruction accelerates learning. It's the best chance of learning that we have. When we instruct ourselves, imagine if we had to learn everything by reading a book or listening to the teacher, we'll have very limited knowledge. So educators these days say that self-instruction is the vehicle, is the instrument for knowledge. Now, if you are going to end this talk, I think, as I said, you might have already thought of what I just told you today. But as the German philosopher Goethe said, everything has been thought of before. Everything has been thought of before. The difficulty is to think of them again. That's the problem.
The hard part.
So let's think again